Welcome to our video history series. Today we're very fortunate to be able to interview Dr. Thomas Purdon of Tucson, Arizona, former president of the college. Tom, thank you very much for coming today.
Ralph, it's my pleasure. I'm really happy to be a part of this.
As we begin this interview, let's get a little bit of your personal history. Where were you born?
I was born in Waterloo, Iowa, northeast corner of Iowa. I think I'll forget the year, but it was in '36. And really grew up in Waterloo, Iowa until I went to the university.
When did you first decide to become a physician?
Oh, I think I had my mind pretty much made up in high school. The question was, what specialty might I end up doing? But I can remember the driving force between my desire to go into medicine was our family doctor that we had, our family physician. And I could still remember his ways and how much I revered his gentle touch and things like that. I wavered slightly. There was one year I thought maybe I was destined to be a minister, but that left me and I went back to medicine.
As I recall, you went to the University of Iowa.
University of Iowa in Iowa City, right?
And from the university, where did you go to medical school?
Well, I did my medical school at the University of Iowa also. And then I was in the last group that did a rotating general internship. And I did that in Michigan under the Michigan plan, but I was at Wayne County General Hospital under the Michigan plan. And I almost ended up going to Michigan for my residency, but at the last moment, as I like to tell people, I couldn't cut the umbilical cord and I went back to Iowa City for my residency.
Who was chair and head of the program at that time?
W.C. Keetle, Bill Keetle, was the chairman at Iowa, and that was one of the reasons that I wanted to go back. And I was very fortunate, I think, because at that time when I got back, he was starting to really bring in a lot of outside people to the department, Leo J. Dunn being one of them as an example. In fact, Leo was Catherine's doctor when we had our one and only child, a daughter, born in Iowa City. And as I was thinking about this interview today, there was a little story about Keetle that I wanted to tell. Bill Keetle was very active, of course, like you, in many organizations, and one of them that he promoted a lot was the Central Association, and I think he was president of the Central. He got a number of us at Iowa to get interested in the Central and the college. And I'll never forget one time after he'd been to a college meeting, he came back and met with the residents and he said, I need to ask you a question. There's a chance that I might get in line to be president of ACOG, and do you think I should do this? And selfishly, we residents said, oh no, Dr. Keetle, we need you here. You have to be with us, because he'd been busy and gone on some other organizations like the boards and the Central. And now I almost regret such selfishness, because he was a man of such integrity and my role model. Obviously, he would have made an excellent college president.
I remember him very well. He was also a superb teacher.
Yes.
Now, we bypassed one particular step. Why did you decide on OBGYN as opposed to all the other specialties of medicine? I know in Michigan they have all sorts of things.
Well, that's a kind of a tough one. There was a while in my senior year of medical school, I did a rotation on cardiology, and one of the chief cardiologists at Iowa in those days was Lou January, and I was really interested in that rotation in the heart, and I thought maybe this is what I should do. But I drifted back to the idea of OBGYN, and that got cemented with the Michigan influence, the U of M influence on the Wayne County program. So there was no doubt I was gonna sign up for an OBGYN residency.
Well, there's been a lot of very famous people come out of Iowa, as we all know. Who were some of the other faculty members that you were dealing with?
Well, there was Jacobs, who subsequently left and went into the medical industry work with Upjohn in Kalamazoo. Bill Howard came from the program in Indiana, and he did some placental work. In fact, he taught me doing my first amniocentesis, and we were putting needles in places we shouldn't have been putting them because we didn't have ultrasound in those days. Leo Dunn, I've already mentioned. Kretschmar came to Iowa. Gopperud was still there for a while. And then I'm having a moment here. Ended up in Colorado. Bill Goddard, and Bill was still at Iowa. So we had quite a group of faculty members that were really pretty strong.
Those are all people that have gone into our history books as very, very important into our specialty. So you had a really very interesting background.
Did.
Tell me, where did you leave when you left Iowa? What was your first professional position?
Well, of course, in those days, the Vietnam War was on, and I signed up for the Berry plan so that I could be deferred during my residency to get my specialty training. And I ended up, although I had taken Air Force ROTC at the University of Iowa, and I liked that blue uniform, I decided to sign up for Army because I thought I might get a better chance to be in a good hospital situation. And I ended up actually, after going through the basic training and all the stuff that they had you do in those days, at Fort Carson in Colorado. And matter of fact, that's where I first met Marge and Bob Park. And there's kind of an interesting story to tell there that this reminds me of. One of their favorite things to do to staff members in the department in those days was to have a party, and they'd bring in all the newbies, as you would say nowadays, and they'd have some martini parties for the newbies. And of course, everybody thought that was okay, but they didn't realize they were at altitude. And you know, not being used to the altitude, and maybe too many martinis or too much, as they used to say, and it was kind of interesting to watch how people navigated the geography that evening in a party like that. But Jay Hill and Bob Park, being regular Army, were of course shipped out to Vietnam, leaving some of us berry planners. And I've told Bob several times I'll never forgive him because they made me the acting department chair, which meant I had to answer to the commanding general's orders for the department for the rest of that tour. Being at Fort Carson, though, enabled me to find a practice opportunity in Colorado Springs, and I ended up in a large multi-specialty group practice in Colorado Springs. And of course, you and I hooked up there a couple of times because of your Olympic Committee activities.
Yes.
But we'd already known each other from Hawaii and ACOG, but we also had that Colorado Springs connection, which was fun.
I remember that I would get phone calls from people on the U.S. Olympic Committee that, did I know an OBGYN in Colorado area? And I very easily could say, yes, I do.
Yes,
and
I remember that well.
I never had one of them come back and complain to me about the referral, so you obviously did things well.
I'm happy to hear that.
That was important. You left Colorado after a few years. Where did you go next?
Well, we spent actually 20 years in Colorado with this large multi-specialty group practice. And I ended up medical director of that organization, and they decided to set up an HMO. And remember, that was in the HMO days when that was beginning to start sweeping across the country. Our daughter had graduated, and so I decided maybe it was time for a little change, and I ended up in Tucson, Arizona. And for 1 year, I was medical director for a national HMO chain, which I am not ashamed to say was probably the darkest year of my professional career. And that year, I, along with 30% of the medical directors nationally for that organization, which can remain nameless, resigned. Fortunately, I had friends at the University of Arizona, Lou Schenker in particular, and Don Christian, and they readily invited me in and found me a place on the faculty at the University of Arizona. And it was a godsend because it kind of course, it kept us in Arizona where we wanted to be to live, but it also fulfilled my desire to get into the academic realm. I forgot to mention that Bill Keetle called me back to Iowa City while I was still in the Army and offered me a position in Iowa City, and I decided at that point, no, I want to be a little more independent. I don't want to be back in the junior, senior resident feeling like a junior faculty person might a while. And so I didn't take that job, but 20 years later I did finally.
And you stayed there until you retired?
Yes, I was at the University of Arizona for 16 years. In fact, I'm still a faculty person. I have a faculty title. We built a home in a retirement community south of Tucson called Green Valley, and we're actually out of Green Valley up in a rural area on the way up to a splendid, splendid area in the Santa Rita Mountains. There's a world-class place there called Madera Canyon, and birders from all over the world and hikers come to that particular area, and we can see that from our backyard, literally. But this turned out to be a wonderful thing, and I now really can say that I've worked in all realms of medicine, from private group practice to academic medicine, military medicine, university medicine, and I'm the GYN consultant for a group of government-granted community health centers, and I still teach residents because I have a third-year resident with me in one of my big clinics in Green Valley. I've renamed the REI rotation. You remember it always was REI in menopausal medicine, and of course to be PC we call it REI in mature women's medicine.
Yes, we have to be careful to make sure we say things that's exactly right.
It's a great experience for those young physicians, it really is, because they get some really common everyday problems that they just don't get in a big university medical center clinic.
Yeah. Let's go back to your first involvement with ACOG. When did that take place?
Oh gosh, I was thinking about that. I think it has to be when I first went to a District 6 advisory council, or it was possibly an ADM. It was over in Nebraska, and Joe Scott was there, whom I subsequently got to know through the Central Association much better. And I first met John Maddox, for example, there, and John, as you know, is in Phoenix now. John and I were both residents. He was with Nebraska and I was with Iowa. And I think that was really my first ACOG thing. And then as a resident, as a senior resident, I was fortunate enough, along with one other resident, to be able to go to an ACM, and I went to an ACM in Chicago, and that had to have been probably in May of '66, I'm thinking. I didn't bother to look it up, but I'm pretty sure it was, and because Catherine was pregnant at the time, and we were all wondering how long she was going to hold out. And anyway, it was that Chicago meeting. It didn't take long, of course, after that to become involved in Colorado ACOG section. I was a section chair, and then I got involved in district, and I went through all the district chairs, the section district secretary, and vice chair and district chair.
And then from there?
Well, then of course, as district, obviously on the ACOG boards, and then the run for the presidency, if you will, and I been on a number, of course, task forces and committees and things like that have just been really, really interesting and invaluable.
What do you see your current role is? You mentioned that you're overseeing these clinics. How do you foresee your role?
Well, I try very hard to be some kind of a mentor and role model for these young physicians. We all recognize that there is a gender gap, if you will, but this community where I'm located now is such a vibrant community, and it's important for these young physicians to see exactly the lifestyles and the medical problems of women who are approaching their seniority, if you will. And I think it's eye-opening to some of the folks about how involved some of these people are and can be, even though they may have a complexity of medical conditions. And they come to us and they'll have the usual types of medical problems, but it's a good opportunity to particularly in a rural community. We are, by virtue of being a community health center, we're in an underserved area, if you will, medically, even though Tucson, of course, is a prime medical community, but not down in southern Arizona. And so we provide a fairly comprehensive care for the women down there in our practice.
How long do you plan to continue that?
Oh, that's a good question. Every year I think, well, is this the last year? And I think, well, I'm probably good for one more. Maybe I'll just keep doing it. And of course, the residents and Dr. Kathy Reed, who's the chair now at Tucson, blow smoke in my ear and say good things and give me certificates, and so I keep going.
Let's go back. You mentioned something about birds. As I recall, you're quite a birder.
Well, yes, indeed. It's a great area, that Madera Canyon. People come from all over the world to go birding in Madera Canyon, and one of my fond memories, our fond memories, Catherine and I, was the time we had with you and Jane out in the boonies in Costa Rica and in Guatemala. There, where we had, do you remember that river trip where we had we had some good birds and monkeys and the little smallish style alligators? I forget what their genus name is, but they're the small
caimans.
Caimans, yes.
And the kids diving in all around them and ignoring them.
Right. You couldn't get me to wade in that water with that going on.
Yeah. What would be your most memorable experience in ACOG if you had to name one thing?
Gosh, that's a really difficult question. There have been so many good experiences. There have been some tough experiences, and thanks to you, helped getting us through some of them. But I think probably the most surprising experience was the Saturday afternoon when Vicki Seltzer called me to announce to me that I had been selected to be president-elect in nomination, because I was busy working in the yard and I'd even forgotten that this was, the selection Saturday of the nominating committee. And when Catherine came out with the phone on the patio and she said, "I think it's Vicki Seltzer, she wants to talk to you," and I thought, oh yeah, okay, she's probably thanking me very much and saying better luck next time or something. And when she told me that I'd been selected to be president, I just about fell in the swimming pool. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was a proud moment, but it was a moment filled with some consternation and anxiety that now this is really a responsibility that I've got to pull myself up to and do a good job.
You were a fun president. I enjoyed being with you. You know that.
Thank you. We had some great times together. We did. Particularly the Central American. We did a lot of travel in Central America together. And it was fun when Catherine and Jane could be with us. We did have good times together.
And now the district that you were chair, District 8, has Central America as part of it.
Right, exactly.
Those are all the good times. What was your most disappointing experience during ACOG?
Oh, there were not too many, fortunately. I mean, it probably boils down to some personality. Well, I can think of one personality clash in particular, which we don't need to go into detail about. That wouldn't be appropriate. I can think of some political disappointments on the national scene that caused the blood pressure to go up a little bit and the pulse rate perhaps. But on the grand scale and the important scale of things, those are little things. They're not the big picture.
If you could make one change in ACOG, what would you do?
Oh, that's a great question. In ACOG itself, it's hard to try to come up with something that I could do. I guess it probably would have to do something with the IRS tax structure and try to make sure that we can include significant others and spouses at least a modicum little bit of sustenance at a meeting and a meal, because I feel so bad for these people who give up all their time and come so far, particularly from our geographic area, as you well know. And then the spouses either are not included, or if they are going to be included, have to pay what I consider somewhat exorbitant prices for a hotel meal just so they can be with their spouse that they've traveled with. But maybe that's out of the realm of what we can do at the college, but you posed the question. If I could, I would try to get the IRS rules fixed so we could do that.
Would you rather do that than liability reform?
Oh, now that's a good question. As you recall, we had the red alert when I was president. By the way, I should mention that one as one that caught me by surprise. Not so much the red alert. We knew what we were doing going into that. But the one about the so-called morning after pill. And I'll never forget that. That was also a kickoff that we did when I was president. And I got a call from Penny Murphy, and she said, "We need to go down to Fox News. You're going to be interviewed by Bill O'Reilly." And I whisked down to the Chicago broadcast station for Fox, and they put you in the typical room and glassed in and all quiet, and they slap a piece in your ear and the hot lights are on you, and pretty soon Bill O'Reilly's grilling me about this pill, and he even didn't understand it. Maybe he did, and he wanted to see what I would say, but he wanted to know why that wasn't an abortion pill. And of course we were obviously talking about progesterone in the morning after pill. But that was an experience that I'll never forget. That happened very suddenly.
Yes, I remember that. As a matter of fact, we had to charter a limousine to get you there in time because there was such a short time.
Yeah, it was just quick. They had to get us through the traffic. And then we had the red alert, as you said, with the professional liability situation. And of course it still looms, and whether or not we're going to get anything meaningful done, I don't know, but I remain hopeful. We probably are going to have to continue to nibble at it around the edges. We've been somewhat successful in Arizona doing just that. Arizona has a constitutional law that says you cannot change a cap or do anything to cap a damage, and so we fought that twice and lost, but we've done other things around the edges which have been very helpful. We were successful and prevailed with an expert witness certification by the judge, so we don't have to worry too much about somebody bringing in a hired gun to testify on behalf of the plaintiff.
Arizona has been one of the states that has had problems, and we have been working in Arizona, and I know you've been very much involved in it. What do you see in the future? Do you see that we will be able to make any changes there?
In terms of professional liability in particular?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, yes. I mean, there's a group of people that are working very hard. The legislature is so unpredictable, though. This year we have a kind of a legislature that is a little bit wildcatish, you might say, and you can't tell what side they're going to come down on or what they're going to do. But I think because we've been successful in getting some of these things done around the edges, and incidentally the expert witness thing was challenged in the Arizona Supreme Court and it was upheld, so I think that one's taken care of now for a while. So that's a brighter picture. We've got financial problems in Arizona that affect health care just like everybody else in the country. Our Medicaid program, as you probably recall, in Arizona is Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment. It had a waiver early on when Medicaid was started, and it's a HMO type of medical system, but it's very, very well run, and it's been more generous with coverage. I've forgotten exactly the poverty level percentage that it's down to now, but we've had more coverage, and so we've been pretty good, and it's been a well-run program. Because of budgetary things, it's going to be cut back some, and of course everybody's fighting that battle right now with the economic times we've been going through.
Well, we live in, like people like to say, we live in interesting times. So let's project to the future. What do you see the future of the specialty?
Well, of course the specialty is changing. I mean, when I think back of the specialty, things that have come up just in my career, fetal heart rate monitoring, good or bad, ultrasound probably was one of the biggest breakthroughs, certainly one that I used the most and have benefited from. And then, of course, genetic testing, and as we heard today with Dr. Collins, a lot of medicine is going to be going that way. This is another good time. I think we're on the verge for more breakthroughs like the ones I just mentioned that are going to be exciting for people practicing obstetrics and gynecology. I worry a little bit about the system, what's going to happen to the specialists in particular, depending upon whether or not certain healthcare reform plans that are in Washington now stick or get modified. But even thinking about the fact that if we are short in numbers, and we certainly are, we know from the studies that we're short on workforce issues. Even collaborative practice, and even with certified nurse midwives and nurse practitioners, I think we're going to be short, and this is going to be tough. I see some potentially rough years ahead of us for a while.
And how do you think we should address those problems?
Well, the more that we can do to get people to be accepting of collaboration, I think, is big. I've always had nurse practitioners where I work, and as you know, foolishly or not so foolishly, when I was president, I decided at that time that we should begin to have a better relationship with the certified nurse midwives. And I had a few people on the board who weren't too happy with that activity, as you'll recall. And you know, it's interesting, and now with Richard Waldman being a president, and he has recircled the wagons with the certified nurse midwife people, and for different reasons. We did it when I was president because we were all worried about liability, and of course reasons now, of course, is we need to have them with us and working with us for workforce issues.
Do Do you see any way that we will ever again recruit more males into the specialty, or we?
That's a concern. That's a real concern. I think as the pendulum shifts, it's obviously it's headed for overcompensation, and there will be times when we're going to want to actually work harder to recruit males into obstetrics and gynecology. And fortunately, most of the women OBGYN people don't want it to get much past 50-50. But I'm afraid that's out of control right now.
Actually, according to our rough statistics, it's hard to know the exact date. It's like hard to know the first date somebody was the first baby of the year. Somewhere in the latter part of last year, we reached the point where 50-50 practicing OBGYNs were women and men.
Mm-hmm.
We now see a lot of students looking at it, but we also see changes in the residents going out in terms of their types of practice. What do you vision the practice of the future to be? Well,
that's a difficult question too, because it kind of depends what happens with the socioeconomic picture and the healthcare reform practices. I'm saddened that it looks like the independent practices and the small practices, even small specialty groups, are potentially in some trouble if they don't have a way to affiliate. But many of these practices are in semi-rural areas that won't have an opportunity to set up some of these big ACOs or to concentrate into large groups, and so it's hard to say what's going to happen with that situation. We see our residents looking for employment opportunities. I don't mean that they can all find jobs right now, fortunately, but I mean they're being employed rather than deciding to set up offices or rather than to go into small office situations. So this is of some concern to me, because I'm a big believer in the independent practice situation. I was in a large medical group, but it was still not that big, and it was a fun practice where we could afford to have a nurse practitioner and do some things that in those days was new, not unheard of, but new, and it was a pleasure to be able to do that. We had fetal heart rate monitoring and ultrasound in Colorado Springs, largely because we had a multi-specialty group practice and we could do some of those kind of things.
One of the things that we're now seeing requests on, and I'd like your opinion on, is that our current residency training program is not really training residents for the type of practice they're going to have, and that we ought to be making changes. Do you see we need changes in our current training programs?
Well, yeah, this has been talked about a lot, as you well know, and I think that it's time that we have some flexibility. Somebody mentioned the other day, maybe the first 3 years are traditional and the fourth year is a start into your subspecialization, or if you're going to do that, or if not, it's an extra heavy year on what you might want to do and concentrate on as a generalist. I think we do need to be much more flexible. We've gotten somewhat flexible with some of the workforce issues. I didn't mention the idea of intensivists or laborists, but we've had a couple of our residents go out looking for those kinds of positions as well. And it's amazing to me that they do it right out of residency, but they've got their eyes open. They're looking around and wanting to test the waters.
Are there opportunities in Arizona for the residents that finish your programs?
Pretty much. If they're willing to maybe go to, again, one of the more rural areas. We always have some of the rural areas looking for an obstetrician gynecologist. One of our more recent ones in the last couple of years went in with a group that is contracted with the Indian health system up in northeastern Arizona, Tuba City, and she's doing very well there. We've had a couple of our residents actually come on faculty in the last couple of years, and so there's places for good people, I think.
Tom, knowing what you know today, and you've been through it, if you could turn the clock back, would you still go into obstetrics and gynecology?
I would. As a matter of fact, I was talking with some medical students about that. Last night we had a medical student reception for District 8, as you might recall, and I really would do that. It's been such a privilege and a pleasure to me to be able to practice obstetrics and gynecology, and I love the kind of work that we do, particularly the variety. This sounds so trite, but everybody mentions it, and it's true. I mean, you deliver babies, and it's a glorious time, and you solve some complicated medical problems, figure out somebody's hypothyroid or PCOS, and then the next morning you go to the OR and do some surgery, and it's just it's a tremendous field with lots of variety and lots of things to do. Yes, I would.
Well, you know, I would too, and I thank you very much for coming and sharing some of your ideas with us today. As you know, over the years, we've been very close friends. It's been a pleasure to have you with a video, but more important than that, it's been a pleasure to have you as a friend.
Ralph, I could say the same thing. It's been a pleasure working with you through
Thank you.
ACOG District 8, and I'm so honored to be able to be one of your final invitees to this video history in your final year with the college. You've done a tremendous job, and I want to thank you and congratulate
Well,
you.
but thank you for all you've done, because it's people like you that supported me doing my job that allowed me to succeed.
Thanks,
very
Ralph.
much.
Very much. Thank
Thank
you.